Hello and welcome back to Introduction to European Paganism. After a pause of several months, we're here again, and I'm thankful for your patience and I apologize for my delay. I have been away and, you could say simply busy with other things. I'm going to make 2 more episodes, actually, this and another one. And the rest of the content I will simply leave it for the readers of the book. That includes the foreword, the afterword, and one additional chapter. In this chapter, we're going to talk about man and the macrocosm, and the book is available on Amazon if you want to purchase it, if you want to own a physical copy, and so forth. So let us continue with the book, Man and the Macrocosm. We use the spoken or written word to express the meaning of what we want to convey. Our language is full of symbols, but we also often use signs or images that are not strictly descriptive. Some are mere abbreviations such as UN, NATO, UNESCO, and so forth, while others are familiar trademarks, brands, and so forth. Despite them being meaningless in themselves, they have acquired a recognizable meaning through common usage or deliberate intent. Such things are not symbols, they are signs, and they do no more than denote the objects to which they are attached. What we call a symbol is a term, a name, or a picture that may be familiar in daily life, but possesses specific connotations in addition to its conventional and obvious meaning. Thus, a word or an image is symbolic when it implies something more than its obvious and immediate meaning, while a sign is always less than the concept it represents. The symbol has a wider and unconscious aspect that is never precisely defined or fully explained. As we explore symbols, we are led to ideas that lay beyond the grasp of reason. For example, the solar wheel may lead our thoughts towards the concept of a divine sun. But at this point, we must admit that reason is incompetent of grasping this concept, because we are unable to define a divine being. Because when we call something divine, we merely give it a name which may be based on belief but never on factual evidence. Because there are innumerable things beyond human understanding, we constantly use symbolic terms to describe concepts that we cannot define or fully comprehend. This is one reason why all religions use symbolic language or images. However, the conscious use of symbol is only one aspect of a more important fact, that man produces symbols unconsciously and spontaneously in the form of dreams. To quote Joseph Campbell, dream is the personalized myth and myth is the depersonalized dream. It is commonly assumed that at some point in prehistory, the basic mythological concepts were invented by some old philosopher and only afterward believed by a naive and uncritical group of people. It is said that the stories were told by a power-seeking priesthood and that they were not true, but merely wishful thinking. But the very word invent is derived from the Latin invenire and means to find, and hence to find something by seeking it. In the latter case, the word hints at some foreknowledge that you're going to find. No genius has ever sat down with a pen or a brush in his hand to consciously invent a symbol, which is why certain symbols can be found all over the world, in cultures separated by centuries or vast geographical distances. No one can take a more or less rational thought, reached as a logical conclusion, and then give it symbolic form. because it will always remain a sign linked to the conscious thought behind it, not a symbol that hints at something not yet known. In dreams, symbols occur spontaneously, for dreams happen and are not invented. Due to their symbolic nature, a dream cannot produce a definite thought because it stems from the unconscious. And if it begins to do so, it ceases to be a dream because it crosses the threshold of consciousness. The same can be said about myths and tales, for they too have the same symbolic nature, and like dreams they often leave us perplexed. Neither myths nor dreams make any sense to us because they are not a product of conscious thought, but symbols whose nature is irrational. Hence why in both dreams and myths, often the solution to a problem is completely bizarre when approached logically and intellectually. Hence also why our myths are full of completely unrealistic creatures, such as 8-legged horses, 3-headed dragons, chariots pulled by goats in the sky or by dolphins in the sea, talking wolves, and many more. But if our mythology is symbolic, this naturally makes us pose the following question: are our deities real? Definitely not in the Judeo-Christian understanding of the divine. They're not really sitting up in the sky or riding their chariots of gold upon the clouds, no. But the fact that they are not supernatural beings, but symbols, does not make them any less real. Symbols have immense power over people, but what we call symbolic today was not called symbolic in the past, and was regarded as the real act of the gods. For example, the universal hero myth speaks of a powerful man or demigod who liberates the people from forces of darkness such as dragons and serpents and other monsters. The ritual repetition of sacred texts and ceremonies, and the worship of such a figure with dances, with music, with hymns, prayers and sacrifices, grips the individual with numinous emotions and raises him to an identification with the hero. The ordinary man is animated by the force of the symbol, of the hero or the deity, and thus becomes it. He is enlightened to the divine, or rather to the fact that he is the divine. So the religious ceremonies for the unenlightened or uninitiated seem as superstitions and worship of imaginary supernatural gods, while the initiated were aware that the divine is not something external, but that essentially their nature is the same as the divine. Therefore, our deities are certainly real, and their powers are real and natural. Hence why the deities are often named according to their powers, their function or attributes, such as Perun, whose name means the beater, the striker, referring not only to lightning strikes, but also to the beating of the heart, and therefore he stands for the very life force of man. Odin, meaning to inspire or spiritually arouse, representing the mind and the spiritual sum of the ancestors. Athena, the goddess of strategic warfare, arts and wisdom, who is born from the head of Zeus, represents thought, the ability to strategize and organize and so forth. And although some of these deities represent things which we may need time to understand, they are deities which influence our lives on a daily basis, such as the sun, the moon, the stars, the winds, the ocean, and so forth. Our deities are not supernatural, but completely natural, and their powers work through us as they do around us. The reason why some people have trouble understanding and accepting this is because they have a Judeo-Christian approach to our mythology and traditions. But men in former times, even before classical antiquity, did not reflect upon their symbols, but lived them and were unconsciously animated by their meaning. This is what made the deities real, and they still are real, because we are still unconsciously animated by their power, which can appear in various social movements, ideology, or entertainment, especially in fantasy and fiction. Later on in antiquity, when philosophy developed and various interpretations of mythology were proposed, Aristotle made a remark that when philosophy is unable to express the truth, one comes to mythology, which again shows that mythology does contain the truth, only it is expressed in a symbolic language. Paradoxically enough, it is possible that we know more about mythological symbolism than any other generation before us due to our modern and rational approach to mythology. And due to this approach, modern man is essentially an atheist, holding nothing sacred and only viewing the world in terms of resources and production. From time immemorial, men have had ideas about supreme beings. Only today do we think that we can go on without such ideas, because we cannot discover God's throne in the sky with a telescope, or establish that a beloved deity is still about in a corporeal form. People assume that such ideas are not true. But such ideas have accompanied man since prehistoric times, and they still break through into consciousness at any provocation. There is also a strong reason why we should cultivate thoughts which are impossible to prove from a modern perspective, because they're very useful. Such thoughts and convictions give meaning to a man's life and help him find his place in the universe. Likewise, he can stand the most incredible hardships when he is convinced that they make sense. It has always been the role of religious symbols to give meaning to a man's life. Our forebears believed they were descendants from certain deities because they were elevated to the divine, and this belief filled their life with a perspective and a goal that went far beyond their limited existence. It gave them ample space for the unfolding of personality and permitted them a full life as complete persons. Their plight was infinitely more satisfactory than that of a modern man who is convinced that he is and will remain nothing more than a victim of his own biochemistry, floating about on a rock in infinite space with no inner meaning to his life. But a sense of wider meaning to one's existence is what raises man beyond mere consumerism. Anthropologists have often described what happens to a primitive society when its spiritual values are exposed to the impact of modern civilization. Its people lose the meaning of their lives, their social organization disintegrates, and then they themselves morally decay. The best example today can be seen among the Native Americans and Australian Aboriginals, who suffer tremendously from alcoholism and drug abuse. We are now in the same condition, for the same thing has happened to us centuries ago. When we compare the barbarian societies of Europe with the civilized ones, we see that the barbarian societies exceeded the civilized societies in moral and spiritual values. The civilization of the Greco-Roman world was already drowning in degeneracy and atheism, and later on it was this civilization that spread its values and brought Christianity to the wild and free parts of Europe. We have not recovered since then. Today, for instance, we speak of matter and describe its physical properties, but the word itself remains a dry and inhuman and purely intellectual concept without any psychic significance for most people. This greatly differs from the former image of the matter, the Great Mother, that could encompass and express the profound emotional meaning of Mother Earth. Everything has degenerated to the limited and egoistic thoughts of man, resulting in the immense emotional energy of the myths to vanish into the sand of an intellectual desert. Dr. Jung summed up the condition of modern man perfectly in his last book, Man and His Symbols. Quote, "As scientific understanding has grown, so our world has become dehumanized. Man feels himself isolated in the cosmos because he is no longer involved in nature and has lost his emotional, unconscious identity with natural phenomena. These have slowly lost their symbolic implications. Thunder is no longer the voice of an angry god, nor is lightning his avenging missile. No river contains a spirit, no tree is the life principle of man, no snake is the embodiment of wisdom, no mountain cave the home of a great demon. No voices now speak to man from stones, plants and animals, nor does he speak to them believing they can hear. His contact with nature has gone, and with it has gone the profound emotional energy that this symbolic connection supplied." End of quote. The profound symbolic connection between man and his natural environment was a result of his lifestyle, for he simply lived and evolved alongside nature for thousands of years, before finally settling between the four walls of his comfortable apartment. And in his apartment, man reads books, watches movies, and plays video games in order to abandon the ordinary world and step into a world in which he interacts with these primordial symbols, because they are still very much alive in his unconscious, and man needs myth like he needs air. As we have previously seen through numerous examples, our forebears understood that man is a microcosmic image of the macrocosm. That is to say that man and the cosmos are the same organism. Therefore, man shares the same patterns as the cosmos, and the power of the symbols operate equally within man as they do outside of him. This can be observed in our myths as well, in which the death and dismemberment of a being is associated with the creation of the universe. There should, however, be a distinction between the creation of the cosmos in the Abrahamic worldview and the pagan or pre-Christian native European worldview. Because in the Abrahamic tradition, existence is perceived as having a beginning, or rather a creation and an end. The pagan or Indo-European tradition is based on a cyclical worldview, meaning that there is no beginning nor end, and therefore creation is part of the cycle, and so either preceded or followed by death, only to experience rebirth. In such myths, the being can die from a natural death or violent death, such as a murder, a sacrifice, or in battle. And although the dismemberment is often physical, it can also be figurative and refer to, for example, the dismemberment of a kingdom, an empire, or possessions. The person who is sacrificed can be identified as a normal man, a priest, a healer, the first king or the first man, but also a deity, some other mythological creature, or an animal, such as a horse, a goat, a bovine, and so forth. Essentially, this being has the role of an ancestor or progenitor. The death and dismemberment of this being leads to a creation, which can refer to the whole physical universe or a specific part of it, but also separate kingdoms, tribes, the classes of men, animals, vegetables, elements, and so forth. Such is the example from Norse mythology, where the god Odin mentions Ymir as he recalls the fashioning of the world from his body. Of Ymir's flesh was earth created, of his blood the sea, of his bones the hills, of his hair trees and plants, of his skull the heaven, and of his brows the gentle powers formed Midgard for the sons of men. But of his brain the heavy clouds are all created. In the Slavic tradition, we do not have a preserved myth of the cosmos and its layers originating from the death of a primordial being. But we do find a similar myth which falls in the same category. It is the myth of the hero or deity who defeats a three-headed dragon, from whose heads then flow rivers of milk, honey, wine, or wheat. In other cases, water flows from the dragon's body, which leads to the creation of a lake, which is analogous to the sea originating from the blood of Ymir. Such is the example of the oldest lake in Europe, the Lake Ohrid in modern-day North Macedonia. The death of the dragon is also part of the vegetative cycle in the Slavic tradition, as the rebirth of vegetation was associated with the death of the dragon by the sword of the deity Yarilo, from whose body the vegetation grew in summer. In iconography, this is usually represented as the vegetation growing out of the being or being spewed out of the dragon's mouth, or maybe even being identified with its hair or beard, which is also comparable to Ymir, whose hair are the trees and plants. Therefore, we see that the dragon has the same meaning in certain myths. A similar description can be found in Ovid's Metamorphoses when he speaks of Atlas, the Titan condemned to hold up the heavens for eternity, who is undoubtedly an image of the cosmic axis. He says, I quote, "Atlas became a mountain as huge as he himself had been. Now his hair and beard were changed into trees, his shoulders and hands into ridges. What had been his head before was the crest of the mountain's summit. His bones became stones, then he grew to an immense height in every part, so you gods determined, and the whole sky with its many stars rested on him." We find this understanding outside of Europe as well, in the Vedic and Zoroastrian tradition, hence why it is regarded as part of the Indo-European heritage. In the Rig Veda, for example, the Purusha is described as a being who becomes a sacrificial victim for the gods, and whose sacrifice creates all life forms, including human beings. While the examples discussed by now were cosmogenic, that is to say, they refer to the origin of the cosmos from the dismemberment of a primordial being, there is also the Anthropogenic approach, which speaks of a man being formed from the various layers of the cosmos. Such is the example from the Zoroastrian tradition, which says that, "And every person has his own length and width, whose skin is like the sky, flesh like the earth, bony skeleton like the mountain, veins like rivers, blood within the body like the water in the sea, stomach like the ocean, hair like the plants, there where the hair hath grown thick like the forest, essences of the body like the metals, inhalation and exhalation of the breath like the wind, crown of the head and brain like the unapproachable heights, head like heaven, two eyes like the moon and the sun." This perfectly describes the worldview of our forebears, which is that man is a microcosmic image of the universe. We are formed by the same elements as the cosmos, and when we die we are dismembered, so to speak, in such a way that the various elements of our being are united with the various layers of the cosmos. As such, we form an inseparable organism. We are the same, transforming cyclically from one state to another. This relationship is also evident in our language, such as the word for spirit being derived from breath and to blow in most European languages, or the weapon of the storm god being the beating heart of man, the womb being a microcosmic image of the universe, with the tree of life being the placenta, the eye being the sun, and so forth. The mythological division of the cosmos between the realm of life and death, sky and earth, or rather underworld, and therefore light and darkness, corresponds to the contemporary division of man's psyche between consciousness and unconsciousness. On one side we have life, light, the sky father, the familiar, the conscious, and on the other side we have death, darkness, the earth mother and the underworld, the unknown and the unconscious. Acquiring knowledge is associated with enlightenment, because everything known is within the boundaries of light, and beyond that is the unknown. Hence why culture and everything within its boundaries is always associated with the solar deity Apollo. This stems from the primitive fireplace, actually, around which we gathered, and beyond which was the darkness. In that darkness of the forest was the danger, where the wild animals lived, in the depths of dark caverns, which is why dragons and other monsters in our midst live in dark forests or caves. Hence also why children are afraid of the dark, for this fear stems from our primordial past. The fear of darkness disappears as one grows older, for one has in a way overcome the darkness. And this is fundamental to our mythology. The darkness is the place of danger and death, but it is also the place where the golden treasure is hidden, where enlightenment is. And it is only through the defeat of the dragon, or the overcoming of darkness, that we can realize our true nature. This is also a psychological fact, hence why all primitive rituals of initiation or reincarnation include the abandoning of the place of light, that is to say the village, the culture, the known, and stepping into the unknown of the forest, the cave, the burial mounds, where one symbolically dies in order to be reborn. The symbolic death and rebirth also refers to enlightenment, i.e., the stepping out of the darkness of ignorance and time, and the realization of one's true, timeless, and immortal nature. This is often symbolically represented by the decapitation of the three-headed dragon, as it stands for the cycles of time, represented most famously as the so-called Ouroboros, the serpent biting its own tail, also seen as encircling the earth among the myths of many European people. The serpent and the tree are often inseparable in our myths, with the serpent living in its roots or sometimes taking the role of the tree itself. As such, the cutting of the tree is identical to the decapitation of the serpent, the cutting of the umbilical. And inasmuch the decapitation of the serpent represents the death of the current state of man and the rebirth in another, illuminated one, so the cutting of the tree was associated with the very death of man. The tree was often the doublet of a person, being planted when a person was born and being cut when a person died. This notion stems from the animistic worldview that man's well-being is in a certain way linked with that of a certain animal, object, or more precisely a tree. The tree became the most prominent symbol of man's totality, or the totality of man's psyche, because it stood amidst the cosmic realms, and therefore amidst the microcosmos of man. Its roots grew deep in the underworld, the dark depths of the unconscious, while its branches grow towards the sky. As such, the tree came to represent the divine, the immovable, eternal and timeless reality rooted in the present moment, at the very center of everything, identical to man's spirit or psyche. Hence why in our mythology the deities live in the roots or in the crown of the tree. The tree was the first temple, with a stone altar below it, and later on temples were built around or near the tree, which brings us to the notion of prayer and sacrifice in our pre-Christian tradition. Prayer and sacrifice are inseparable in our tradition. As in most European languages, the word for prayer simply means to ask or to request something from the gods or ancestors, for which one offers a sacrifice in return. The words temple and temperance in the English language are derived from the same root because the act of sacrificing was initially a form of temperance and moderation, that is to say, sharing with nature, or rather the deities. Nature or the deities had already provided man with the initial provisions for him to survive and thrive, such as hospitable weather, animals to hunt, wood to cut, fruits to harvest, and so forth. If man was completely egocentric, he would take all of these resources without returning anything to the deities, for which they would punish him by letting him starve because there is nothing to hunt or gather anymore, by making them prey for predators because there is no more animals that they could eat, or by causing a flood or drought because there are no more forests, and so forth. Much of these things we are experiencing today, such as floods, wildfires, earth erosion, drought, diseases, food shortages, and so on, due to modern agriculture and animal husbandry, and simply our modern egocentric lifestyle. But our forebears learned quickly that there are forces which are greater than them, and they sacrificed the part of that which they gained in order to have it again, perhaps more. They would kneel and sacrifice the seeds, grain, and nuts they would usually use for food by planting them in the earth and praying to the Mother Earth, asking her to provide them with more fruit, more wood, and other resources. They looked to the sky, lifted their heads towards it, and asked the Sky Father for hospitable weather, good sunshine and rain, for life to prosper on earth. And when the giant serpent would devour all the waters and fertility of the land, they sacrificed an ox to the storm god and the sky god, who would kill the serpent and let the waters flow down as rain, rejuvenating the Mother Earth and restoring balance in nature. The ox was a sacrifice by the whole community. As such, an animal was a precious resource for our forebears. It was fed and cherished by the whole tribe, and was later sacrificed under the sacred tree, usually an oak. His blood covered the trunk and flowed down the roots, and the animal was cooked and eaten by the whole community. Prayer and sacrifice are therefore inseparable. One must offer something precious to the gods in order for them to give what is asked of them in return. But essentially, by sacrificing that which is most precious to him, in the moment man sacrifices himself to the will of the divine. Hence why, although no religious tradition is sowing seeds today, kneeling or bowing before the divine is present in every tradition, including our pre-Christian tradition. For it is a gesture of submission, of self-sacrifice, or rather the sacrifice of the egoistic desires to the guidance of fate, the gods, the ancestors, the spirits, or the self, expressed by the symbol of the axis mundi. Terminology is irrelevant in this case. What is relevant is the realization of the limitations of our ego, and the importance of surrendering its desires to the guidance of the divine. For if we do not only do we not realize our true nature and develop our full potential, but we suffer terrible consequences. Our world is full of such consequences, growing worse day by day as a result of egocentric, selfish, greedy, power-hungry, and comfort-seeking lifestyle. The future fruits of life will be given by the gods to those who know of moderation and temperance and express it through sacrifice and goodwill. For the gods help those who help themselves.